Hello there, I'm your friendly neighbourhood fangirl and I am one of the many people who rewatch Over the Garden Wall every year as an autumn tradition. My favourite chapter is Hard Times at the Huskin, in which Wirt and Greg, our central characters, interrupt the Pottsfield Harvest Festival, involuntarily discovering the truth about the peculiar pumpkin citizens. I love their design, and this time around I felt inspired to bring one of them to life, so I chose Pumpkin Gal to be my second cosplay of 2024. This video will walk you through every aspect of the costume before bringing you along to the photo shoot. From my design stage, I wandered into the unknown of the internet to gather reference images. I am very grateful for the existence of the Facebook page Every Over the Garden Wall Frame in Order, as it gave me the opportunity to note down many details that I hadn't caught sight of during my annual rewatch. After selecting an image of Pumpkin Gal to act as the core of my cosplay, I used the eyedropper tool on Microsoft PowerPoint to create colour samples of everything from the dress to the pumpkin itself. Then I was ready to create the costume. Our first piece of clothing is a white or cream coloured shirt. You don't see anything more than the preferably billowy sleeves, so I just repurposed the shirt that I used in my Belle cosplay last year. This dress looked very different when I first found it in a second-hand shop. Content with the length and the colour, I understood that changing a handful of other aspects would be worthwhile. I unpicked the belt loops and the buttons, sewed up the open front and the side slits, and completely cut off the sleeves, except for the parts that would fill the empty holes left behind. With the addition of 2 shoulder straps, it can now be easily layered over the shirt as our second piece of clothing, the right way to wear the dress being the wrong way around. I made the shawl from scratch using 3 pieces of fabric. The bottom layer is more gold than the wheat colour of Pumpkin Gal's real shawl, but endeavouring to find all my purchases for this cosplay second hand, choosing the colours closest to those of my samples was the best I could do. I cut, sewed and attached 2 little beige leaves where the sides of the shawl touch. They peek out from beneath the top layer, an almost olive green neck ruffle that I created by incorporating elastic. And that's our third and final piece of clothing completed. Now it's time to tackle the pumpkin head. My paper mache approach was inspired by a Rachel Maksy video that I've linked in the description below. I started by scrunching up a stack of old newspapers that a couple of local news agencies had allowed me to take. Stuffing these into a plastic bag large enough to establish the size of the pumpkin head, I tied it off and used some string to create the ribs. A basic paper mache paste contains only 2 ingredients, flour and water. After giving my mixture a substantial stir to get the lumps out, I painted it onto the newspaper strands that I had ripped to measure a couple of centimetres wide. Placing them onto my base, I ended up with a total of 6 layers after 3 days. I would create a new batch of paste in the morning, place a vertical layer of strips by midday, and then place a horizontal layer of strips in the afternoon. I found that letting a layer dry completely before placing the next produces the best results, and, content with the strength of my structure, I proceeded to paint my pumpkin. It took another couple of days to attach the hair. I measured and cut many strands of wool during this time, folding them in half and gluing the upper half to the top of the pumpkin so the lower half could hang loose. Pumpkin Gal has 2 green bows keeping her hair in place, so I found some fabric and followed a trouble-free tutorial to make them. You can find it linked in the description below. I decided to add 2 long tails attached to each bow so they could be tied around the hair with ease. After using hot glue to attach a plain straw hat, the pumpkin head was complete. The remaining wool and bow fabric proved perfect materials for making the hands. My sewing machine could stitch over both at once, so I just made little ties to fasten around my wrists. Pumpkin Gal is never seen with any props, but I wanted to honour the amount of detailing over the garden wall by including some in this cosplay. My first addition was a handheld basket filled with food seen in Pottsfield: corn, apples and eggs. My second addition was Greg's rock, because it's a rock fact that I've always wanted to paint my own. My third addition was the wooden sign that Work comes across early in the episode, reading Pottsfield, 1 mile. And my fourth and final addition, the last part of this cosplay, was my little brother Pippin. He is an English Springer Spaniel and looks pretty similar to Beatrice's dog, in his smaller form.
You love my costume.